Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're visiting with Jeff Yago, author of the newly released book, Light On. This is a extraordinary book, the non-technical guide to battery power when the grid goes down, brought to us by WND, WorldNet Daily. We're very happy to have you with us, Jeff.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being with you today.
Jeff, you are a licensed engineer, NAB CEP certified solar professional, a certified energy professional with more than 40 years professional experience working in the energy and emergency power field. You're a regular contributor to Backwoods Home Magazine. You've contributed to Home Power Magazine and Mother Earth News. You're committed to energy independence. You live outside of Richmond, Virginia, but not off the grid.
I'm not totally off the grid of where I live today. I do live in a solar home. We've lived there for about 25 years. We have multiple sources of power. We do have the grid mainly to run air conditioning. Anybody in the Virginia area, humidity is a big problem during the summer. So we do rely on the grid for that. But if we lost the grid, that would be about the only thing we would be inconvenienced by.
Now, this energy, this solar, that's kind of weaning us away from all of the technology that we're so driven by. When did that become an interest to you?
I guess I've been involved in solar and battery power for most of my career. I've done an awful lot of solar projects for military facilities in other countries, for commercial facilities, institutional facilities, and over the years, many of the projects have involved emergency power, backup power, and it's just been a part of my career path, I guess, and I believed in it, and that's one reason why the home I built was solar powered. We built it back in 1992, so we've been in it since then.
Now, this is what you do professionally?
I am what I'd like to say semi-retired at this point, but yes, it's anything involving energy, emergency power, energy conservation, battery-powered systems has been a part of my work experience through all the 40 years of my professional career.
Now, do you consider yourself to be a prepper?
I would certainly consider myself a prepper. I would say that. The prepper community, I think, is changing. I know years ago the preppers were thought of as, the sky's falling, and I think today, when I go to conventions and I speak to a lot of these groups, the majority of preppers I run into are very family-oriented. They're very much interested in a family as a whole. They're not, looking at the guy that's sitting back in the mountains, dug out in a bunker, waiting for the world to end. They're very much just looking at this as another way to help plan on preparing for their family in case something happens.
What are the possibilities? We're looking at North Korea. We're looking at this nuclear threat from Iran, nuclear threats coming out of the former Soviet Union. Is that really the big threat? Is mutual assured destruction, or EMPs, or something taking out or attacking the power grid that's not an act of war but an act of terrorism?
I honestly, I don't claim to be a military expert. I certainly don't have any hidden information sources, but in all honesty, from what I have already been aware of, I feel strongly that our big concern is grid attack, either or a combination of, it could be an EMP weapon, for example. It could be a terrorist attack. It could be a computer hacking. And certainly we've had a number of these cases already in the United States just in the past couple of years. We've had physical destruction of substations. We've had thousands of attacks or attempted attacks by hacking on the grid. And we also have the fact that our grid, which has been very reliable up to now, a lot of this equipment, though, is over 70. It was built in the 1970s. There's a lot of just age involved, and sometimes people think the utility grid is like one entity, but these are all separate corporations. And of course, they're profit-making corporations. They each are making their own decisions as to maintenance and repair and replacement of equipment. And any attempts of security is pretty much they're on their own. There's not a government agency that's saying, okay, thou shalt do this or thou shalt do that. It's all pretty much whatever level of security they think they need. And it's my concern that that's just not going to be enough. I think the future in this country, there's going to be more power outages. I think they're going to last longer. And I think they're going to affect more parts of the country.
The impact of a power outage, the impact of the grid going down, how does generator technology, how does battery technology, how does solar technology kind of bridge that gap, and how expensive is it to equip a family dwelling with this kind of equipment?
Well, the whole purpose of my book is to provide low-cost ways a typical homeowner can provide some backup power, regardless of whether the grid is down from a extended, from a hurricane and or terrorist attack, whatever the reason. My book is how can a person without any real technical background do some simple preparations now at minimum cost to be better prepared. And most of those suggestions in the book do involve battery-powered devices, but I'm not, there's nothing in the book that's telling people to go out and build a solar-powered home, for example, or go out and buy big generators. They're all simple technologies, and they're also, everything we talk about are portable. So for example, if somebody has made a lot of preparations for a power outage and then has to evacuate either from a storm or approaching hurricane, everything in the book can basically be packed up and taken with them.
So we're talking about portability. If the families in New Orleans during all the flooding had this, they could take it with them and be able to go to another facility with their handheld or hand-packed equipment that would do what? Because there would the cellular system be out? What would communications be like in that kind of scenario?
Well, a lot of your cellular towers do have backup generators. They're not required to. There's no national requirement that all cellular towers have to have battery or generator backup, for example. I know some of them have been burnt from unhappy customers when there was some long power outages that couldn't get cell service, because today I think we're approaching something like 40% of the homes now rely totally on cellular technology as opposed to landlines. But so there are attempts to make them have backup generator capacity, but whether that's for a day or a week, it's up to the carrier. But if that goes, you would still have other technologies available. There's battery-powered radios, for example. There's, the book takes a different item in your home and points ways that you can have the same item, have it battery-powered rather than have grid power. So if you take a typical AC appliance like a flat-screen television, for example, it's only going to run on the grid power or if you have a backup generator. And if you have a backup generator, it's only going to run as long as you have fuel. In a grid down event, you're not going to be able to run down to the gas station and refill the tank. So those are very limited options, for example. If you had a battery-powered television, which are readily available, fairly inexpensive, that's going to run on grid, generator, plug in the outlet in your car, a little solar-powered charger. You have more options available to you. And again, the book is pointing out different types of devices that you can purchase, and people would be surprised how many quality items you could get fairly inexpensively. I'm talking maybe in the $25 range, things in that range. I'm not talking about thousands of dollars of solar equipment.
So is it your contention that every home should have certain requirements, certain things that are essential for communications, for information, for survival, that would run on AA batteries, AAA batteries, C cell, D cell, and then charging ability through solar, or draw their power off of solar or other car battery, which only holds a charge for so long?
I think that's a good summary. Of course, I do discuss rechargeable batteries, for example, what types to get. I also recommend when people are out buying battery-powered appliances and equipment, try to standardize on just maybe 1 or 2 battery sizes. We don't want to have a house full of battery-powered equipment and then 15 different kinds of batteries and no way to recharge them up. So I am looking to make that simple. I've also pointed out that AA battery is probably one of the best ones to standardize on, and for multiple reasons, which I do discuss. But to kind of expand on your statement, the first question I ask people when I am meeting them on this topic is, do you own a flashlight? And most people, I'm surprised, tell me they do not, or the ones that tell me they do, I then ask them, okay, where is it? And they typically don't even know where it is. And then, of course, the final question is, well, does it have batteries in it, or have the kids taken the batteries out to run a toy? So something as the first absolute line of defense when there's a power outage, no matter what the cause, is a simple flashlight. Yet, people just don't even think about that. And typically what happens is the day before a storm is announced, everybody runs to the store and buys bread, milk, water, and whatever batteries they can find. And I'm trying to eliminate that process, at least on the power side, and say, look, there's some little simple preps you can do ahead of time. In the book, I list over 200 products that you can buy that are battery powered. And of course, each person's going to have a different need. They're not going to need all of that, but they're usually surprised at the number and quantities of items that are battery powered that you can get today.
In the studio we have battery backups, and we have rechargeable batteries for everything that we do with a large charger, and it just makes sense economically for us to be able to recharge batteries. We use them every single day for our microphones and for our various pieces of equipment. And we found that there are many things which are battery operated. The technology, our cameras have a battery plus an AC power. There's so many different things that we tend to not think about how many battery-driven devices we have. You think about a video camera. That's a battery-driven portable camera, but it plugs into the wall to be recharged. You and I both have beards. My clippers are rechargeable. Those kind of things that when you think about it, you say, well, that's odd that I'm going to have so many battery-powered appliances, but the fact is we already have battery-powered appliances. We just don't really think of them as such.
That's true, and also, of course, everybody has a cell phone today, and that they just rely on the grid every night to plug them in and charge them up. But what if that grid is not on? When people lose their cell phones today, they're losing the internet access. They're losing being able to send text messages back and forth. They're not able to access news sites. So, I have chapters in the book that describe multiple ways to keep these small devices charged up. Very easy to keep a cell phone charged up from multiple technologies. And the other thing about battery appliances to begin with, if we take a standard AC appliance, even if it has a an energy efficient label on them, they're still not that energy efficient. I mean, that's a voluntary, rating system that's out there. And yes, I would rather have an appliance that has an Energy Star rating as opposed to one that did not. But if we're looking at long-term power outage, something months, not days, we want appliances that just use a tiny amount of electricity to operate. And any device that's made to run off of the grid, typically, energy efficiency is not the primary design and cost, part of that function of it. Whereas if you take a battery-powered device, for example, a battery-powered camera, if that doesn't run a long time on the charge, the competitors, will put it out of the market. So a battery-powered device from the whole design concept has to be small, lightweight, and make it very energy efficient. We want it to run a long time on a charge. And I've had older battery technologies, for example, in the first digital cameras, you could barely run them more than 20 pictures and they were dead. And today you can get a digital camera that can take hundreds of pictures before it needs to be recharged. So the technology of battery power today is far different than maybe what a lot of people remember from just a few years back.
You tend to think when somebody talks about battery powers, you're thinking about heavy, like car battery, and you're thinking about a bank of car batteries, but that's not the case. As a matter of fact, I found something so fascinating when it came to your subject about lighting, that these Malibu lights, these driveway lighting that are solar powered, that you talk about using that for a lamp, and that is, you have that ability. And my question for you would be, can one lit one recharge another one?
No, but I do have a chapter on lighting in the book, and one of my favorite preps is to buy some really good quality solar yard lights, not the ones that are $2 at the checkout bin, but they make solar powered yard lights in the $10 to $15 price range each. They're typically about 4 inches in diameter. They have a nice round solar cell on top. So the round flat top ones are I would certainly say are a giveaway as a better quality light. They have a little heavier battery in them, a higher capacity battery, and they give out a lot of light. It could easily light a room. And one of the prep that you mentioned is, instead of buying these yard lights and sticking them out in the ground, I first put some conduit or some pipe in the ground where you want these lights to go. Stick up out of the ground about 2 feet, and then you stick your light into that pipe. And then if you do have a power outage, I also have made some blocks of wood with a hole drilled in the middle and a piece of conduit and same size. And if you bring that light in at night and just stick it in the base, they look exactly like a table lamp. And I have some pictures in the book of that. And so if you have, say, 4 or 5 of those, that's 4 or 5 rooms you can indefinitely light. They will, if you put them back outside every day to recharge, during an extended power outage, you could have pretty much unlimited light. And that's just one simple thing that I discussed. There's many more tricks that we talk about.
Do you recommend a grab-and-go bag with certain items in it? And if so, what items would I pack?
I certainly recommend it. I personally have one in each car and one at the front door, and one per person in the family. I think it's important to have such a thing. As far as the electrical part of it, I have in each one of mine, I have a fold-up solar module about the size of a small book. It would easily fit in a glove compartment or in a go bag, as you suggested, and these will unfold to be about 3 feet long, and they have enough wattage to easily charge up cell phones or a laptop computer, for example. Again, very simple technology, small, lightweight, Uh, I also have several different chargers that plug into this fold-out charger that will charge multiple AA batteries. So I can charge up 8 AA batteries at the same time, and a cell phone, whatever I have. That's a very simple way to solve that problem.
Where do you obtain those, and how much do they cost for that solar module?
A solar module typically sold to charge up a cell phone. They run about 5 to 7 watts, and I've seen several for in the $50 price range. If you want one large enough to charge up say for example, a laptop computer, you're talking about 25 watts. I think prices today are in the $150 range for something like that. Now, of course, any solar charger of any size will eventually charge up something if you wait long enough. But the idea is you don't want to have to use the solar charger for 10 days in a row before you can use your cell phone for 5 minutes. So you want to match the size of the solar charger for the device you're charging, and you may actually want more than one.
It makes sense. I don't think that I've ever really thought through this before reading your book of what the essentials would be in the case of a grid failure, or in the case of you're outside of a metropolitan area there in outside of Richmond, but it would be the Washington, D.C., Bethesda, Northern Virginia area that would be hit, but that would certainly impact you. We're in Birmingham, Alabama. We would certainly, Atlanta's close enough to us that might be somewhere that there would be some impact to. But in thinking about those kind of scenarios, we then have to look at an EMP.
We can talk about that a little bit. I am not that concerned, maybe I'm the only one not that concerned about a nuclear attack to this country. It doesn't make sense. Again, I'm an engineer. I think, in practical terms. And, I know from everything I read, China's long-term goal is to basically foreclose on the United States at some point and take it over. They already own a lot of infrastructure. I think they look at our farmlands as a future source of food for their country. So I don't see China allowing North Korea, for example, to be setting off any nuclear bombs on the surface of this country. I just, there's too much risk to their future access to their infrastructure they already own. So again, that's just me talking. But I will say this: I think China would not have any heartburn if, for example, North Korea detonated a EMP device. And an EMP device, of course, is going to impact our technology, but there's no radiation. There's no, it doesn't cause death to people or animals. It doesn't destroy infrastructure or buildings. It's just basically going to really cause havoc with anything electronic or connected to the power grid. So in that respect, to me, an EMP is a poor man's, way of taking out a large country, especially one as interconnected as we are today. If you would set off an EMP device over North Korea, they probably wouldn't even know it. It looks almost dark at night due to their limited use of electricity. But in the United States, look at this country at nighttime, what it looks like from almost coast to coast. So, an EMP device can be done with a very low yield nuclear explosion at a high altitude and will not rain down radiation. It just basically it generates this electromagnetic wave that it's almost like lightning on steroids. In other words, if lightning would strike your house, it obviously is going to destroy anything that's electronic connected to wiring. But at that close range, it could also possibly destroy things electronic not connected to wire. So that's a possibility. You mentioned the cars earlier as we can talk about that some. But unfortunately, the lightning protection that we rely on, surge suppressors and filters and things, they can't react fast enough to an EMP. An EMP energy wave is so fast in rising to peak. Basically, it would go right through a surge suppressor before the surge suppressor would even wake up and say, you know, what was that? I mean, it's that fast. And of course, its magnitude is greater. It's like having a radio transmitter that can transmit on every frequency at the same time, you know, all across the radio magnetic spectrum. So to me, that would make more sense if somebody wanted to harm this country. And the other way, and it could be in conjunction, is the damage to our substations. A government study a few years back identified if only 6 substations were destroyed at the same time, we could lose the grid to half this country and take 6 months to a year to get back up again. Of course, we have hundreds and hundreds of substations. They're not identifying which 6 substations to do this to, but they have identified that it's a limited number, and the damage could be severe.
We're talking with Jeffrey Yago, author of the newly released book from WND Books, our good friends at WND, WorldNet Daily, entitled Light On, the Non-Technical Guide to Battery Power When the Grid Goes Down. This is an essential handbook. This is non-technical. This is for everyday people to be able to look at your home and your lifestyle to see how you can minimize the impact of this infrastructure problem that all of us are aware of in this country, both from a highways and an electrical grid perspective. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to dig further into grid power, generator power, more about the battery-powered devices, more about hacking, physical attacks, the aging of our systems, and more when we come back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only 2 ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our one-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9. Shalom and welcome back to Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Jeffrey Yago, author of the new WND book, Lights On, the Non-Technical Guide to Battery Power When the Grid Goes Down. Jeffrey, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
This is a fascinating subject as we look at preparing for what I think you and I believe is inevitable, and that is the risk that we face in this country because of aging plant property and equipment. That the vulnerability of our grid is something that we don't talk about. We, in the back of our minds, every now and then we'll hear something, see something that will remind us, but we are so clueless about any of the risks that we've either faced that are real or perceived. We just know that there's a possibility of a blackout like there was in New York City back in the 70s. What are some of the risks that we're looking at? What have been some of the real threats, the real action taken against this? Because they are not publicized. The media does not cover any of this.
You are absolutely right. I'll list a couple that are more recent just to give people an idea of why I'm concerned. We'll start in 2013 near San Jose, California. It's called a mid-calf substation. If the listeners would be driving between any two cities in the United States, I'm sure they've seen substations sitting out in the field. There's typically some big transformers with a fence around them. They're isolated. There's no security other than the fence. Some of them do have security cameras, but the bottom line is they rely on the fact that somebody would be crazy to go into that fence area because of the high voltage, the risk to being electrocuted. But the fence doesn't stop damage from shooting, for example. Anyway, back in, I said 2013 at Midcalf Substation, California, somebody came in and shot up 17 transformers. They overheated and melted down, and the news media reported this as vandalism by local teenagers. They claim one of the teenagers swiped the dad's squirrel gun and were out there taking practice shots at these transformers. And that's what the news media said, and that's what everybody believed. And to this day, if you mention that, that's still what most people think happened. That's not what happened. What really happened was there's an underground access tunnel between the cities where this substation is located, directly over this tunnel. The first thing they did is somebody in the middle of the night went into that tunnel. They had the tools to access it. They knew which fiber optics cables to cut. They cut these fiber optic cables with the tools that they had the correct tools to do this. That immediately stopped all security signals coming from the substation, so nobody would get an alarm there was going to be something happening at the substation. The second thing happened was there was little piles of rock spaced around the substation that had been pre-positioned days ago in the daylight, so that in the middle of the night when this happened, sharpshooters knew exactly where to go to not only be in direct line to shoot the substation transformers, but they were also not in line of the cameras. There was nobody visible in the cameras when these were attacked. The third thing was they did not shoot the transformers. They shot those small radiator fins on the side of them, which act like a radiator on the car. So if you shoot the fins, the transformers are full of cooling oil. So it would take a sharpshooter at some distance to be able to do that damage. And that's what happened, and 17 transformers melted down, and then substation was destroyed. Now, they found over 100 shell casings there at the site when they came in to investigate. No fingerprints. So this clearly was not a couple of teenagers out having a good time. That's just one example. In Cabot, Arkansas, this was again in 2013, a very high voltage, high tension line. It was over a 500,000 volts. Somebody cut the bolts underneath the tower. There's over 100 bolts that hold those tall towers upright. They cut all but 5. They left just enough so they could get away before the high winds took the tower over. And then, of course, it fell on railroad lines. It shut down the railroad. It shut down the lower power lines for weeks. In 2014, there was a power station in Arizona that had a 50,000-gallon storage tank of backup fuel. They had found an explosive device had been placed under that. In New England last year, pipe bombs were found underneath several of their high-tension power lines. Fortunately, they were disarmed before they did any damage. But, I mean, this is going on a weekly basis, and yet you're not hearing about it in the news media. I've also mentioned earlier the hacking attempts, which we can talk about in a minute if you like.
Yeah, I think that any of the ones are the threats, and we look at a risk assessment because as a public we've been kept in the dark. And so this idea of having to have a plan in case the grid goes down has been kind of a remote possibility, not understanding why there's been no attacks, but seemingly the media doesn't cover these attacks, and there hasn't been an outcry from a community that's been impacted by it to the point where it's made the national media. And if it has, it's been a couple of lines about it and it goes on. So I think that the threat level is greater than the public realizes. And because of that, we're just lulled into this, well, why do I need that? It just hasn't happened. In 1977, New York City blacked out. That's 40 years ago since we've had a major blackout that was front page worthy. So, you know, people have this false sense of security when these are the most vulnerable places. Our wastewater treatment plants, our public water sources, and our electrical grid are the ones that are the least protected entities. And if I want to destroy a population, I go to the water source.
Well, and you also mentioned New York City. That happened in July of 1977. It was only one night, 25 hours. It took 25 hours to get back online. But what happened there real quickly is about 9 in the evening, they had a lightning strike. There had been a storm earlier in the day. It wasn't actually storming that night, but there was a lot of storm activity in the area. It was a very hot July evening, humid, hot, people out in the streets, and a lightning strike took out a substation. A minor inconvenience for most power grid operators. They know how to reroute power around a typical substation like the problem like this, but What happened was that 15 minutes later, a second lightning strike took out a second substation. And 15 minutes later, a third lightning strike took out a third substation. So then the Con Edison operators got on the phone and called their emergency backup crews at they have backup generator plants. They had all gone home for the evening. There was nobody there to start the generator. So then they switched to power coming in from New Jersey on the high tension lines, and those quickly got overloaded, and the New Jersey operators had to shut those down. So within about a half an hour in the evening, New York was now totally dark. Now, in that evening, that night, there was, by the next morning, there was 4,500 looters had been arrested. There was over 500 police officers had been injured. There was over 1,600 stores looted and over 1,000 stores burnt to the ground. And this was in one night. If we have a grid down event, you're not just going to lose electricity. You're going to lose water, sewer, everything. And New York, for example, uses 1 billion gallons of water a day, 1 billion gallons of water a day. And that's also 1 billion gallons of sewage that has to be removed every day. There's also 8.5 million people there. Can you imagine trying to emergency provide food and water for 8.5 million people? It's just not possible. And that's just one city. A grid down event is going to affect multiple cities, and you will not want to be anywhere near a city if we have a grid down event. That's absolutely the best advice I can get is get out of Dodge as quickly as you can.
So we're vulnerable from the shootings, we're vulnerable from natural disasters, we're vulnerable from an EMP perspective, and then there's computer hacking, and all these things are controlled by computers. So if the computer system goes down, the grid goes down.
Well, that's absolutely true. And, again, all of these grid operators are separate corporations. If one of them discovers somebody's been hacking them, for example, I doubt very seriously if they're sending that information to the other grid operators. There's legislation in this country that keeps separate utility companies from, working together in a lot of cases simply because of concerns for price fixing and other things. So there's not just one umbrella group that can have the power to dictate to these utilities what they have to do. It's still a voluntary type of cooperation. But I feel like, hacking of the grid is not something that's just going to shut it down. There's a lot more things a hacker can do to our grid, and shutting it down to me is the least concern. For example, if he could cause a brownout, which would immediately damage everybody's appliances. He could quickly switch from one power station to another or one substation to another out of phase or out of sequence, which is going to destroy large motors, industrial motors, like elevators, lift gates on dams. So there's a lot of mischief a hacker can do. And this has already happened in Israel. It's happened in the Ukraine. Both of those countries in the past 2 years have had external hacking of the grid that shut them down. Now, fortunately, in both cases, it only took about a day to resolve the problem. But I think in both cases, that hacking was a test. I don't think they were doing anything other than making sure they have access to it. And I wouldn't be surprised if most of the grids today have already been compromised. They just haven't been switched on or actually accessed it, but it's sitting there with the software ready to do this.
So our vulnerabilities are great. The question then becomes, what does the Department of Energy, what are some of the disaster plans, if there are such a thing as disaster plans? And is the government concerned about the citizenry, or is the government only concerned about the government?
Well, it's certainly public knowledge that the government has already made some preparations remotely from Washington, D.C. For example, here in Virginia, we have Mount Weather, which is a large underground facility to what they have a COG, continuation of government. there's a number of other locations in the United States where there are set up or plans or backup facilities that would allow the different departments of the government to relocate quickly to underground protection, where they have adequate, backup power, adequate food supplies, water storage. But I think honestly, years ago, and I don't know that I could lay this at any one president or any one Congress. I just think over the years, as people started to study this problem, they realized it's just physically not possible for a government agency to be able to come in and be able to provide food and water and power and shelter for millions and millions of people. Other countries, for example, have used a lot of their underground subway tunnels and subway stations as emergency places for their population that can go to. They have provided emergency power, emergency waters, drinking water, some basic food supplies. I mean, that's one simple example that is being done in other countries. But in this country, I just don't see any effort since our civil defense system was shut down back in the 1990s.
So what do we do? Do we stay in our homes? Do we fill our bathtubs? Do we, what is the plan? Do you carry water purification tablets with you everywhere? What is the real plan for preparing yourself minimally? What's the expectation? 3 days, a week, 10 days? What's the duration of an event?
Well, of course, any preparation that you make based on my book, you're going to be prepared for a typical couple of days outage from a hurricane or a storm or something like that. But honestly, in my mind, a grit down event, we're probably talking about not the whole country, but a large section of the country could possibly see a power outage lasting months. I mean, some of these transformers can take that long, can take 6 months to a year to replace it, the larger ones. So it's not impossible that a power outage would last that long. As far as what should somebody do, for example, every chapter of my book takes a different item in the home. For example, if you're on a CPAP machine, for example, a lot of people have medical devices that need emergency power. We discuss that. We discuss emergency ways that you can cook food, or emergency types of refrigeration, emergency ways that you can pump water, emergency ways you can filter water. As far as do you stay or do you go, that's kind of the classic question, I guess. If you've made adequate preparations, in my mind, the safest place to be is at home. If you are not in a downtown New York City, for example, but if you're in a less congested area and fairly safe neighborhood and you made some basic preparations, certainly that might be for most people to stay and be prepared there. I know the prepper community has finally realized that the guy with the shotgun up in the woods is not the way to go, and they're starting to band together, and you see groups of preppers in neighborhoods. I go to conferences and I'll meet maybe 10 people, and they all say, well, we live in the same area, and one guy's here's a nurse, and one guy's a mechanic, and so they are looking for people with skills of different varieties that would be useful, and they're banding together that way. So I think the folks in the city are going to have to envision leaving. And I think the people who are out in a rural area, the best thing they could do right now is to start making friends with neighbors. And it's better to have them prepping too than knocking on your door, wanting in and wanting to share your limited food supply. So I think that's the way the prepper community is going today, is to try to start banding together to solve this problem.
But for the person who's older, what's your advice to them?
There's plenty of sources out there for advice on what types of food that somebody should have as a backup, water as a backup. In my mind, the absolute minimum is to have not only some emergency lighting, but a emergency radio, some way to be able to stay up on what's going on outside your door. There are very small flat screen televisions that are readily available and fairly inexpensive that you can also, if television channels are available, they can use that. But and some small, say, fold out solar chargers, or if all else fails, a big battery, a bag of batteries, I guess. But you know, it's not an easy answer. But you know, I think the first step is just trying to make people recognize that this wonderful grid that we've enjoyed for so long has been very reliable for most people, is in for some hard times in our future. And I think it's the most perfect thing for another country to attack. It's a very soft target. These substations are in nowhere. They're not, you know, in any way secured. You know, I just think that's another example of some easy targets that we're going to start seeing with terrorism. And I think the hacking is something else that's going to be on a much more wide scale problem. But just be aware, and I hope they will consider buying my book. I've tried to make it as inexpensive as possible, and I've tried to recommend things that are low cost. You know, I spent a lifetime professionally working on $1 million solar systems and these large systems and backup power systems at a military bases and commercial systems. And I kept saying there's got to be a simple way an average homeowner can do this, especially if you can't afford to go out and spend thousands of dollars to build a solar home like I have. What can they do? And that's really what has driven the 3 years of research that's gone into this book, plus my many years of experience of trying to provide some very simple advice. As you pointed out earlier, it's non-technical. I don't require anybody to, you're not going to be using a soldering gun or have an electronics background. It's basically just, if they will just pre-purchase some of these low-cost devices, if nothing else, put them in a closet until they need them. But I want them to have some basic things that will give them some peace of mind if there is a long-term power outage, regardless of whether it's caused by an EMP or terrorism or natural causes, or even, you know, sunspot activity can actually wreak havoc on our grid system also. So there's just many things that we need to be aware of.
What in this last minute and a half that we have for this segment, what would be a budget that you would recommend somebody earmark for this investment?
Well, I think if we include a solar charger fold out for a cell phone, a solar charger for a laptop computer, and some of the LED lights I recommend, and some certainly a quantity of rechargeable batteries, I would think we're looking at somewhere in the $400 to $500 price range could easily do this, and they don't have to do it all at once. I mean, these components are all individual. You could buy them separately as you go along. For example, I mean, just if every month they would buy 8 rechargeable batteries. I mean, things like that. That's $20. So I think the first step would be to recognize the problem, get an idea of what types of battery-powered devices are available, and then see which of those devices best fits their own lifestyle and their own needs.
Well, you've been very helpful, very informative, giving us a better understanding of the threat level of what we're facing. Jeffrey Yago, author of Lights On, and we just appreciate so much you being with us here. We thank our good friends at WND and WND Books for sending you to us. Once again, it's Lights On, the non-technical guide to battery power when the grid goes down. Visit the WND Superstore. When you check out, put the initials IAN in your checkout code, and our good partners at WND will make sure that we receive a blessing at no additional cost to you. So we encourage you to get a copy for yourself of Lights On, the non-technical guide to battery power when the grid goes down, by Jeffrey Yago, Y-A-G-O. And Jeffrey, how can they find you on the web?
Pretty easy to find. I write for a number of national magazines. I have articles every month. These are
Give me a
easy
website.
to do.
Yeah, give me a website.
Just basically Google my name, Jeffrey Yago, Jeffrey Yago, and that will take them to hundreds of free sites and articles they could read online.
Great. Thank you so much for being with us. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.